Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. My name's Thos Ribbits, the creator of Thos World, also known as Candide's Lament, which of course, as you know, is actually a song from the 1974 production of Candide. A fairly esoteric start. Well, today we're going to be looking at a show which has come to London, and indeed Britain, a number of times from Broadway, with varying success. But the show itself is a well-known one. It's Barnum. An enormous hit when it first opened in America in April 1980. It ran for 854 performances and featured the amazing Jim Dale as P.T. Barnum. And such was its success that it very swiftly came over to London's West End in 1981, where it ran for 655 performances, which is nothing to be sniffed at, and in so doing reinvented Michael Crawford, who had had a long career in the West End, but by that time had been slightly pigeonholed as a television sitcom star. But Barnum thrust him back into the centre of the West End world, and of course we know where that led. A massive disfigurement and life in a sewer, or as we know it, Phantom of the Opera. I think we can safely say that it's Barnum that gave him that opportunity, and then the career that he's had since, which has been remarkable. And of course it's been to Britain on several other occasions, with Paul Nicholas and Peter Duncan playing P.T. Barnum. But most recently, it was at the Menier Chocolate Factory, with Marcus Brigstock in the role. And it's that production we're going to be talking about today. But let's talk a little bit about the people who made Barnum come to life in the first place. The book was written by Mark Bramble, and he of course was the co-author of 42nd Street, and it must have been a busy year for him because Barnum opened in 1980, and 42nd Street also opened originally in 1980. The lyrics were by Michael Stewart, who had a long career on Broadway, not just lyric writing, but he did also write the lyrics for I Love My Wife, the Robert Preston vehicle. And of course, perhaps most famously, the music of Barnum was written by Cy Coleman. And if you've heard that name before, and you really ought because he is one of the later greats of Broadway, he was the composer of Sweet Charity and City of Angels, both of which had long successful runs in London. But of course, he'd written many other songs, and most recently I've discovered that he also wrote the song for the opening of the marvellous Cary Grant film Father Goose, which is called Pass Me By. He wrote it with Carol Lee, she wrote the lyrics, and it's a cod British musical song, and it was written because Cy Coleman and Carol Lee wanted to try and write a song that was reminiscent of the early 20th century British musical, which of course is what Cary Grant, when he was a lad in Bristol, and in those days called Archibald Leach, would have remembered from his youth. I'm not sure it's an absolutely perfect example of a British musical number, and of course it was written 50 years after the form died, but it does have a certain pastiche joy, and if you listen to most recordings of it, you'll discover that particularly American singers sing it with the most outrageous, over-the-top cod accent that would make Dick Van Dyke shudder with embarrassment. Well worth listening to the song alone for that. But that's all a diversion. Let's talk Barnum. And in fact, let's hear me talk Barnum with an old friend of this programme, Colin Malloy, the up-and-coming new composer. He and I sat down to talk about the recent Menier Chocolate Factory production of Barnum, which we had both seen, but not in each other's company, to find out what we thought of it. And so, without further ado, and, as they say, rather a lot of nothing, let's hear that conversation now. Here's Colin Malloy. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Colin.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming back to Musical Talk. I'm always interested to hear what you have to say about shows. Now, we've discussed Follies, and there are many other shows that we shall discuss in the future. But today we're going to talk about a show that came to London, and It was its first London revival in about 25 years.
Yes.
2, I have to say, mixed reviews, and because of that, I think as our discussion progresses, we're going to have to clarify the difference between the productions that we saw, not together, separate nights, and the show itself,
yes.
i.e. the groundwork and how it was erected for us. This show is Barnum, and I'm going to start by asking you what may seem like a facile question. How far can you see a parallel between Barnum and Follies, which were out at the same time in London?
There is, I think, a vague parallel between them. They both have this... Well, I don't think this production of Follies, but what I know Follies to be, which is a kind of spectacle in some senses, has a parallel with Barnum, which is a spectacle. I don't think too dissimilar from a show like Pippin as well, for example, which is also circusy and spectacle-like and full of tricks and acrobats.
Yes, that's a very good observation.
But it does have that commonality with Follies, which is, not to use it as a pejorative, but a superficiality to it, I think.
Which, a confection.
Yes. It is entertainment for the sake of entertainment.
Which is pretty much also the lifestyle choice of the main character, Barnum. I mean, that's how it works, isn't it?
Yes.
It takes Barnum's ideas and then gives you a show about Barnum using those ideas.
It does, yeah.
There is, however, an inherent weakness with that, isn't there? Which is actually that the problem with all spectacle and no real content is that actually, isn't that a bit of an empty meal?
I'm inclined to say yes, but I'm feeling in a good mood. I don't know. I think there is something to be said for a show that sets out to be just an entertainment show. A fun story about someone who led a fairly interesting life and does just that. It doesn't promise us
a searing insight into humanity?
No, it doesn't promise us anything difficult or anything challenging. Why should it?
Yes, we don't want all shows to do that.
No. I think it's honest to what it wants to be.
Further question then. Now, how many people is Barnum about?
Oh.
I don't mean as in, it had a large cast for London production of performers doing wonderful things already. It was made to feel like a circus, and we'll touch on this. But I suppose the question is it about Barnum or is it about Mr. and Mrs. Barnum?
I think I want to say Mr. and Mrs. Barnum, but Mrs. Barnum is a very underwritten character, and it is called Barnum, and I think it is just about Mr. Barnum, no one else.
You see, and I think that's the problem it struggles with all the way through.
It wants to be about the both of them, or it wants to be about more than just Barnum.
Yes, but not quite about both. It doesn't know what it wants to be, I think. I agree with you. It certainly wants to be about Barnum.
Yes.
But the problem is Barnum isn't Barnum on his own.
No.
In fact, actually that's true, because even the version we get, the stage version, is suggesting that the relationship with his wife is symbiotic, even though they're very different. And then she dies. Sorry, chaps. Spoilers. Before he does. Obviously, they're all dead now. I don't want to break that to you, but but the thing he's most famous for is Barnum and Bailey, the circus.
Yes.
So actually, everything he does successfully is almost done in tandem, even when it appears he's going on his own. And the show can't quite meet those demands, because neither Bailey, who is very much an afterthought at the end, in fact, he's your denouement, if you like.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Barnum are, as you say, not quite fleshed out. Which is not to say that the actress on the night didn't do a stunning job. I think her name was Laura
Pitt-Pulver.
Yes, exactly. And she, I think, was the hit of the show for me. I thought she was quite the best thing in it. And every time she came on stage, I felt safe, which is odd. When I feel, that's not to say dangerous anywhere else, but actually there were one or two areas where it was a little bit underpowered, or I felt that I was getting something I could chew on when she came on and did what she did, whether it was acting or singing.
It's interesting you talk about being drawn to that character, and it's also interesting when we spoke about Follies, us being drawn to the vignettes.
Yes, quite.
I think in Barnum what I was drawn to more were the vignettes of acts that Barnum had created. I can't remember all of them, but like Tom Thumb.
Yep, the 160-year-old lady.
Exactly. Those were the characters that I was drawn to, more so than Barnum and Charity.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because actually, in real life, that's what would have been the case. These
That is
were the people
true,
he was
actually.
putting up to
Yeah.
be appealing. The Barnum show wasn't about Barnum's travelling show at the time.
Was not about
Yeah,
Barnum.
it was not about Barnum. His name was on it. He was making the money. He was the showman. But actually, it was the exhibits. It was the people. I mean, I'm afraid it's difficult to separate one from the other because that's how certainly Victorian values. Freak shows were as much. People were exhibits in all their forms.
Yes, that is true. And perhaps in parallel with Follies, what Barnum is a deliberate circus show with not much substance and purely a kind of a spectacle evening in the style of a circus.
In the big top.
Yeah, exactly,
fact, yeah.
as is done very well, I think, in the menu.
Well, let's talk about the production before we explore the book a bit more, because I think there's still a lot more to be said about the book. But the production, I thought, was very successful in how it felt, how it looked, and the focus as far as it was able to give to the story of Mr. and Mrs. Barnum, because funny enough, I was trying to read some of the original reviews. Do you know Glenn Close was Mrs. Barnum Charity?
I did not.
In a very early production. She's done well for herself.
She has, yeah.
But actually, the reviews of the time suggested that she hadn't made anything of it. It was an underwritten part, and it was underplayed because of that underwriting. I think that in London, we were lucky enough to be able to see that built up so much more impressively. That part actually felt a lot better than it would have done on paper. And that's a mixture of performance and direction. But let's talk about the ambience and the feel then, because the Menier is not in the round usually.
No, it's not.
But this
It can be, though.
It clearly can be. They must have
Yeah.
done a lot of demolition because it was made to feel like a circus tent, wasn't it?
It was,
Which is
yeah.
ironic, bearing in mind that actually Barnum's life leads up to being in the circus. It is not about being in the circus for really most of his career. It's only the last 5-10 years, I think.
Yeah, that is true. And I think having that in the round feel of being in a circus and having all of the characters there very close up, including Barnum and Mrs. Barnum, works well, and it helps the intimate scenes between Barnum and Charity work, I think, in a way that perhaps it might have not done if it was front on.
Yes, I did feel the atmosphere was generated. Physically being in a round is a very different theatrical experience. It's trying to say so, but actually it's not just different for the cast and the director. It is different for you, the audience.
Yes, yeah.
Because you have there's nowhere you can't see in a round, which I suppose you'd argue the same in the proscenium as well.
Yeah, that's true.
It'd be a very bad stage that you can't see, but it feels you have a different take on things. You have certainly vastly different sight lines. And there was so much going on. There was so much to distract you. Barnum, for the most part, there was a kind of central podium in the middle of the round, and he did quite a lot of his acting on that.
Yes.
Marcus Brigstock playing Barnum here. And a lot of the essential plot points, such as they were on that point, or occasionally to one side or the other.
Yeah.
But we had performers doing the most
All
amazing.
around, yeah.
Yeah, they've been described as looking a little bit grungy. But, they look like people who have been on the road doing their acts for 20 years, 30 years. They're people standing on their heads and tumbling and climbing poles and, some of the structural points of the building.
Right, I think many of the cast members were actually from Canada, from Cirque du Soleil.
Were they?
So I think they were actual born and bred acrobats,
Well,
to some extent. At least some of them.
I had no reason to believe they weren't anything other than professional, because they were so good.
They were great.
And they gave a constant, when I say agitation, there's constant movement all the way through. And it wasn't just that, there were other little moments as well. There was, I think, to symbolise a train journey, we had a tiny little circular train at the top of a supporting pillar. So the eye was made to dart across the room, which is different to a proscenium production, and worked brilliantly for that. I thought the Menier was made to work marvellously for the story it was telling.
Definitely.
Were there any other directorial choices you thought worked particularly well?
I thought Come Follow the Band, which is...
Act 2 opener?
Yes, worked well, but maybe that's... I had a friend in the band, so seeing him come out, he's a double bass player, but he was playing the bass drum.
Oh, right, yes.
I don't think they paid him double, though. That was a great number in the sense of just a huge number of people on stage. And again, I think it comes down to the whole spectacle of that, and you're not expecting a huge band to come out, and it does. It happens.
I tell you what I found amazing about that song. It was the odd distinction between, because the way it stages, the orchestra for most of the piece, are high up in a corner.
Yes.
A little bit like a bandstand, but it's sort of closed in.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of little balcony in the front where some of the performance takes place.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really see them, you're aware of them. And then they come on in Act 2, go round the circle 3 or 4 times like a parade.
Yeah.
And then when the song comes to its natural end, most of them filter back up to their little room across the stage. They don't leave and come back through the back door, they go up.
Yeah.
But you can subtly tell, what I thought was interesting was the song is fantastic, actually. Let's it's one of those songs that actually you forget how good a march it is. As good as anything Sousa was writing, I think. And catchier in many senses. So it's a great song, really good rouser in terms of the energy. It got Act 2 going again in a way that I think many other shows could learn from.
That's true.
But actually, funnily enough, you could suddenly see the natural non-stage loving nature of most of the orchestra, because they were wandering around in their sort of peak caps and their uniforms, but they weren't all enjoying it, or so it looked. There was 1 or 2 faces and you think, I'm doing this because this is part of the show, but actually I really don't like being watched, because normally I'm not watched. I normally do what I do, which is amazing, but hidden round the corner, as it were. So there were a couple of non-gleeful band members, but actually it was a stunning Act 2 opener.
Yeah, it was.
So, right, well, let us talk then. I think we have to talk about Marcus Brigstock.
Yeah.
He's a light comic who I quite like.
And I'm sure a very nice person.
I'm sure he's charming. I know him most from the radio.
I know him most from Stupid, which was a CBBC programme back when I was in my very, very early teens, I think even younger than that.
Right.
And he played a king who had dominion over the world below him and made people do stupid things. And that was it. I loved it.
So he has got acting chops at one particular level. It's not his fault, I don't think, particularly. But let's hide behind the reviews. Most of the reviews say, and I think fairly, that if you have a show like Barnum, you need an actor who can really oomph it up. Historically, you think of Jim Dale, Michael Crawford, even Brian Connolly, who's got the right kind of thing and did it on the national tour in this country a few years ago. And you can see that would have worked, and the reviews said it did. You need someone who's just got oomph. And in the best will in the world, I don't think Marcus Brigstock had oomph. That character needs to be big, because let's talk about, because it's the marriage between the character and the casting, as any good show should be.
Yeah.
When you're casting, you need to think about who, it's not a meritocracy, it's actually who fits and looks right and can do it. And Barnum is the central character, as you quite rightly said. Mrs. Barnum is a driver, but she's not really a central character as much as this production tried to make it so. But he's a larger-than-life character. He's, as he christens himself, the king of humbug. Although I must tell you, my interpretation of humbug is quite different. I take the Victorian view of humbug, which is actually, which I think is the best purveyor of pricking humbug in modern society is in Hislop, who takes hypocrisy in public life and tries to deflate it with a rapier. Whether you think he does it well or not is a matter of, but he's a de-humbugger. I don't think of humbug as hucksterism or bombast, which actually I think is what you get more of. I don't think he's a humbugger at all.
No.
I'm fully aware of what I'm saying here. But I mean, it's obviously how the plot works here, but he's not really into humbug, he's into spectacle. As you were saying, these are the parallels with a Follies production, not just Follies by Sondheim. It's all about spectacle, it's all about wanting to believe what you're seeing, a little bit of that theatrical magic, quite a lot of that theatrical magic, in fact, it's dolloped out rather than pipetted. He's all about how it looks, and content and veracity and authenticity aren't actually important. He has this museum at the beginning which is full of fake artifacts.
Yeah.
You need that character, and Marcus Brigstock didn't quite meet that. So I'm not here to criticise Marcus Brigstock. I think it's a casting decision, but of course it does have an effect on how that production. If your Barnum isn't quite being Barnum, does leave you with not much else in the show.
Well, that's why I think the great thing about the show is how good all of the small vignette acts are, and I think that is what carries the show. And to come back to your other point, it's not really about Barnum at all, it's about Barnum's circus and those acts that he created, and I think they, in some sense, drive the show more than Barnum and his wife do.
Legacy.
Yeah.
Because, you can see what the writer is trying to do. There's this, in fact, it's even reflected in the score. Barnum is all about big colours, big gestures, and his wife is almost puritanical, although they are clearly a love match, so, there's no friction between them in terms of love, but there is a friction in their attitude to life. She's about authenticity and being real and keeping his feet on the ground, and he wants to float off. So she needs a little bit of his colour in her life, and he needs a little bit of her black and white common sense in his. And that is identified as being the driving dynamic, particularly the first 3 quarters of the piece as a whole. and that works very nicely. There is an incredibly clunky, I think, underscoring of that in the score. Actually the big sentimental number is called The Colours of My Life. Is this a good song? I know the answer, but...
It's a bit obvious on the nose, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. And up it eventually, I'm afraid.
Yeah. It's the kind of sentimental number that I think maybe works once, or maybe for a verse, but
yes,
as a metaphor maybe is...
A middle eight would be fun.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, and in fact, I think she has a song about black and white at the beginning, fairly near the beginning of Act 2. I can't quite remember.
Probably blotted that out.
Yeah, well,
in black.
Yeah, but it's that obvious in some senses.
Yeah.
So we're not talking subtle the book or subtle the lyrics, or even I have to say subtle music. Although I think the score is better melodically than it is lyrically. And I know you're a fan of Cy Coleman. I
am, yes. I do though think it is his weakest score. I am a big Cy Coleman fan, but I remember when we spoke about Follies, we were talking about pastiche, and I think Cy Coleman is a chief pasticher, more so than Sondheim is in Follies. All of his scores, I think, are incredible. Sweet Charity, City of Angels is one of my favourites. I also think On the 20th Century is incredibly funny and incredibly well stolen from the kind of
homage
early American kind of operetta, but Barnum has things that don't have a line of continuity through them.
I agree with that.
And there is a song, I can't remember what it is now, almost feels like a 70s soul song, which feels really out of place.
It's not aged well, that piece, is it?
No, and that's surprising for someone like Cy Coleman, who does strike me as someone who is who knows what he's doing. And
yes, but Sweet Charity has that. I mean, obviously, Sweet Charity is absolutely the swinging 60s and early 70s, the film.
It is, yeah.
But one or two, The Rhythm of Life, it's a perfectly charming song, but it's dreadfully, it's of its era and can be of no other era. It's not timeless. It's nor is it deathless.
But I think that's what he does well, and I think.
But age, if he plugs into the period in which he's writing, which he clearly does, then he's left behind, or some of those songs are left behind.
That's true. So you think maybe they are museum pieces in some respect?
Oh, I see what you did there, by the way. The Museum of American History, or whatever it was. Yes, a little bit dusty, perhaps, one or two. Let's talk about the tongue twisters. What are the songs that immediately come to mind with Barnum? Well, we've mentioned Come Follow the Band.
Yep. There is a sucker born every minute.
There is, yes. And that, what's charming, I think that sets him up quite early on as being a charming huckster. Yeah. Because he finishes by saying, the biggest fool is me, because I believe all this.
Yeah.
And actually you'll suddenly think, oh, hang on a minute, he's not cynical. Or he's not as cynical, because Barnum could be a horrible character.
He could,
he?
Yeah.
He
yeah,
could
yeah.
just be in it for the buck. He could just be saying, look at these stupid idiots who swallow everything I give them. But actually, you're supposed to, and I think we did, buy into the idea that he's an idealistic cynic.
Yeah, he is.
If that can be said to exist. I mean, and that's an interesting combination. But the plot then doesn't do anything with it. He's, once again, we're back to the person who brings him back down to earth and makes his plots and schemes mostly work is his wife. And then we've got the bizarre Act 2 stuff, where suddenly we gallop through
decades
quickly, seeing failure after failure. And then we learn ultimately that without his wife he's not really able to be successful unless he's in partnership, funnily enough. I mean, if there's a lesson in it, that's the lesson. But do you not find some of the plots and things, the failed projects which are not theatrical, they're non-theatrical projects in the second act, leave you wanting to hear more about those? There's the first one about building a housing estate, a kind of sort of philanthropic housing estate, but they build it on bad land, so it all falls to bits with it. There's no sign of it very quick. And that's one of her projects, where her sensible project is being tempered by his colour, so that's her failure almost more than his. And then his foray into politics. And you're given this strange, tantalising idea that actually he was far too liberal for his period. He believes in black emancipation and things which didn't sit well, and ultimately was why he didn't do well in politics. But suddenly you think, oh, hang on a minute, where's this come from? We haven't been told why he has these views, how he's so out of step with his fellow man at that period politically, when clearly he was very much in step with their day-to-day entertainment needs. Where's that juxtaposition come from, and why aren't we being told more about it?
Yeah, that is interesting, but I think to be more truthful to the show, what I like is, how we're almost immersed in this very, very fast-paced, circus-like world where our eyes dart around and where we get one act and then immediately another act. I think the beauty is that the plot does that similarly. It's almost a pothole history of Barnum interspersed with these interrelated but also non-related circus acts, and there is some truth. There's truth in that, in the piece, and that it's true to itself, and it's not, as I said earlier, not going out and saying, okay, this is the history of Barnum. It just kind of is, inadvertently, by showing his life in a potholed, albeit
I think that's
way.
A beautiful way of putting it, yes. Because it is, funny enough, it's a very linear plot. No subplots particularly.
No.
So yes, it's just a simple road from the beginning to the end. So and yes, potholes is a nice way of putting it, because you're not getting the full story. There's a bit of bump here and there.
But you don't feel shortchanged at all.
Maybe you do. I feel it's an empty mill. Once again, because I do think it's all confection. I think it's all spectacle and very little substance. I must say that. Right, here's my question for you, because it's quite a linear telling, which I think we can say this is where it differs very fundamentally from Follies. It's quite a linear telling of Barnum's life.
Yeah.
What is the jeopardy in Barnum's life? What is he up against? Is he up against anything?
Nothing really in particular. More just the death of his wife.
That's true. That's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And he learns a lesson from that. It takes the loss of her to realise what he's lost, I suppose. It sounds trite, but it is the revelation. And then he goes into partnership with Bailey.
Yeah.
Act 1, the closer. This needs to be discussed. The tightrope walk to Jenny Lind. First of all, can you explain to me what your interpretation is? What's going on there?
Oh, you'd be very disappointed. To me, it's more just Barnum tightrope walking for the audience.
But he's going from his wife to Jenny Lind.
Yes, that is true.
There's a hint or suggestion that he's having an affair.
Yeah.
Is that affair tacitly accepted by his wife, or is it unknown to his wife affair?
It seems unknown to me. Or almost that she is aware or doesn't want to accept it.
Yes. I think there's that element. I think she does know. I think she has accepted that for him to get Jenny Lind, which is going to be the making of them financially, and presumably therefore unlock her building projects, her sensible projects, she has to turn a blind eye to him having a relationship with Jenny Lind, which he then does, with comic effect, as we see in the beginning of Act 2.
Yeah.
She's quite an arch interpretation of Jenny Lind, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's not... One Last Kiss, that kind of operetta.
No,
it's
true.
Much more tongue-in-cheek, which makes it very difficult to sing. But in terms of jeopardy then, that immediately denies the jeopardy, because if the affair is being done tacitly with his wife, knowing, or at least not acknowledging, but being aware of, for longer-term gain, then actually there is no jeopardy. If it's being done without his wife knowing, that makes it, what's the jeopardy? The jeopardy is that we don't like him anymore, because actually he's the wrongdoer. It's not actually Jenny Lind per se, although it takes two to tango, but it is Barnum who's making he's being unfaithful. So that's not really jeopardy. It's jeopardy in the sense he's throwing away all the things that make his life good, i.e. his wife and the structure that comes with that. But it's not, Act 1 ends with him heading off to have an affair with Jenny Lind. And the tightrope, I assume, is supposed to be a representation of the risk that this represents, but I don't see what the risk is.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
No idea.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. Could the show work without the tightrope? Because this is another problem. Marcus Brigstock has been widely reported as falling off most nights. He wasn't able, as Jim Dale or Michael Crawford were able to do, to walk across the tightrope.
Well, I think that's the big shame. I wanted when watching it to not have to worry whether whoever was playing Barnum was going to get across or not.
It's an audience clench moment, isn't it? And it really was.
Definitely.
Particularly when it fell off the second time I saw it.
So I think it serves as a nice, talking about metaphors, it's a nice metaphor for what Barnum is leading himself into, and The Colours of My Life might be a unsubtle one, but the tightrope is a nice circus-themed metaphor.
Yeah, it works within that context. But my issue is, I mean, it's a great coup de théâtre.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who saw Barnum when it came to London in the 80s as a young man loved it and thought that was the most amazing thing he'd seen in theatre at the time. And it must have been quite impressive.
Yeah.
But does the story need it? Or is it there? Was it there at the Menhir because everyone expects there to be a tightrope at the end of Act 1? I can understand, therefore, why they put that in if that is the expectation. It would be like doing Miss Saigon without the helicopter, but actually, do you need the helicopter? Do you need the tightrope? I'm not sure you do, not for the narrative. You need to suggest some kind of transition, and I would have hoped a clever director, that's not to say the director wasn't clever, he was marvellous, but it wasn't working, it didn't work. I'm not sure it actually holds quite as much allusion to what's going on as we're being led to believe. So I would have cut it and come up with something else.
That would be risky, though, I think, because there is something in Barnum that isn't trying to play towards being symbolic of anything, and I think the tightrope is a great analogy of what's going on within the context of the show.
But what is it representing? Because I don't think, I still can't see the jeopardy it represents.
I do get what you're saying, but I think if it were to be something more abstract or than the tightrope,
well, not interpretive dance.
But something more vague or more subtle,
or a human pyramid. You could still keep it within, something that actually requires support and structure and has a certain amount of jeopardy in the physicality of it.
Are you saying a human pyramid is more easier to produce than a tightrope?
Yeah, I think it would be a much more interesting coup de théâtre. We're all expecting a tightrope.
But we get a human pyramid.
I'd love to have seen him standing at the top of a human pyramid.
Oh, I mean, I would agree with you on that. And I think, maybe they were right to have someone like Marcus Brigstock falling off the rope, because that creates that kind of tension that we want.
But do we want? Now, here's another thing.
Do we want him falling off?
Well, not so much for what it does to the plot. If we're saying that the tightrope represents something, if he can't do it, then does it still represent it? There you've got that problem. But actually, you have the other issue, which is there is the danger of pulling you out of what the drama is. So the drama, such as it is, has been set up, and then suddenly you're no longer thinking really about the plot. You are feeling sorry for Marcus Brigstock, you're worrying about whether he's going to do it or not.
Yes, that is true.
And suddenly you're pulled out of the moment. I don't think it draws you into the drama, I think it takes you out of the drama, and I think ultimately that's bad for the story, isn't it?
Well, that is true. But also, I'm sure you're perfectly capable to operate on two planes of thought.
I like to think 37 levels, actually. But yes, you are quite right. Yes, you are. There is a duality in us.
And I don't think the show doesn't inherently rely on us being drawn in and keeping that illusion. The circus is illusion in as much that we know what we're seeing are performers, and they're not actors in the same sense that when you go to a theatre and see something straight on, there is that fourth wall, and really, if anything, having it in the round and creating this kind of circus tent feel, and having the performers all around us and those illusions constantly being tested or played with, I think is almost all in the style of what Barnum is as a show.
I suppose, you're not wrong there, yeah. You're right, because it all comes back to how successful was it as a spectacle, because if that is what the show is, if it is all glitter, and remember, all that glisters is not gold, use Sondheim's occasional collaborator, William Shakespeare, then actually let us look at the spectacle. The Tom Thumb scene is quite good, because we actually cut to a speech box normal size actor, a smaller statue actor, but no one abnormally small, to use a horrible phrase, but not Tom Thumb size.
No.
And the way that is portrayed is that it's almost like we've been zoomed in, isn't it? Which is a clever thing to do in a theatre. You get a huge elephant's trunk to suggest scale,
yes.
And there's a couple of other things. So that is a interesting concept, which we are being expected to understand from a cinema point of view, being brought into theatre, and we all take it absolutely immediately. We understand the concept of here we are, close in, close focus, to allow the normal size actor to pretend that he's Tom Thumb size. I thought that was absolutely lovely, and the elephant was created
charming,
with sort of a grey hose, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And there were several other moments like that. I liked that kind of spectacle. Is there any particular spectacle that flabbered your ghast? Gasted your flabber?
It was all too much. I can't remember now. The fire breathing was great because what you forget when you see a fire breather is you don't only see this huge flame, but you feel the heat from it.
You do, yes.
Wherever you are in the room, and the fire breather was on the other side of the room, and you instantly see the flame, and then you're hit with the heat.
It's a tangible act, isn't it?
With
which you have a physical connection. You don't actually get that much in a theatre.
No, you don't. And I did like that. I was a sucker for it.
There was also a mermaid in a glass box on the way out.
There was, and I missed it. I was told,
did you?
yeah.
Oh.
Sad.
She waved at me.
Oh, did she?
Barking up the wrong tree there, I thought. I did think, actually, I also had the speed advantage over her.
Yes.
What with her not having legs. So the story develops on in its own sweet way to the end, and then we get the circus bit. Funny enough, that's the bit that almost seemed least memorable. I have, now looking back on it only from a couple of months ago, I have almost no memory. I know intellectually how it ended, but I almost have no memory of Mr. Bailey turning up and them going, yes, let's set up a circus. Because we don't really see this. We've been in a circus, but we haven't seen the circus.
That's right. You just jogged my memory by saying that, because I couldn't remember that at all, how it ended. Yeah.
Let us go back to our comfort zone there, which is the score and the lyrics. Because I think we've explored the book as far as, the book is... It does what it does. I think you're right, to project its confection. It's spectacular, but isn't quite a toothsome meal. And such symbiosis of stories, the wife and Barnum, does what it does a little bit clunkily, but does it. Although no disrespect to the actress, because she was fantastic, even when she was dying. Well, you saw her in pain beautifully, if that makes sense. The song we haven't spoken about is once again, it's always the Gilbertian lyric, which I think separates the men from the boys, to use the old-fashioned phrase. The exhibits that you can see in his early American museum, which burns down. It's a proper tongue twister lyric once again.
It is
beautifully written. Now, I think that's actually one of the lyrical highlights of the show. I'm not sure it does anything to move the plot onwards. It's him extolling how marvellous his museum is, or is going to be, and ends with, well, you're not supposed to take these... the story it portrays isn't really a story. Such as it is, you'll enjoy it so much, you'll go out of the door marked exit and you'll come all the way back in again. Yeah. Because you've loved it so much. Although earlier on in the dialogue, it had already been explained that was going to happen because they were going to use a fancy word for exit that no one would understand. So, in a way, it wasn't even pushing the plot along. But the joy of the song is also its weakness, which is actually you sing the song through pretty fast, so people get a rough idea of what the exhibits are, and they are random. And then it's sung again faster. And so you're supposed to be admiring the dexterity of the performance. That is an interestingly narrow thing to ask of a song.
True. Yes. I'm trying to think of other songs that do stuff like that. And the things that are popping up in my head are Getting Married Today from Company.
Yes, that's true, although she doesn't sing it through again.
She doesn't, and I think
it also carries a plot a bit stronger.
Yeah, and I think that's the clincher there. The
song, funnily enough, it reminds me of is by the Sherman Brothers from Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. Portobello Road.
Okay.
You may or may not know it's if you've seen the film, it's actually a much better song than you think it is. You need one or two listens and you realise it's actually quite natty. But it's the song that starts with the Professor character taking the family round. They're looking for this book.
Sure.
They're going around Portobello Road, an enormous bric-a-brac market, and he is once again listing, not fast, but listing all the completely random things that you can find in the market. You know, a new Botticelli. You know, also poking fun at what's being offered and things like that.
Sure.
And there's the clippers that cut the end of the cigar of Edward VII and all this kind of stuff. So it's a selection of random artifacts is essentially being sung about.
Yeah.
It then changes into a sort of 10-minute sequence of, as far as I can gather, every part of the Commonwealth's troops coming on and dancing their stereotype dance, you know,
Okay.
as you'd expect. So we had the Scots guards turning up in their kilts and dancing a bit Scots, and then there's a Jamaican steel band. It's a very liberal, because it's set in the Second World War.
Yes, yeah.
So these troops might well have all been in Britain. They didn't seem to have their mind on the fighting. I must say there was a lot more dance and spectacle and perhaps choreography than I would have expected from the armed forces. But it's a beautiful sequence. But that is, funny enough, the song that I'm always reminded of when I hear the Artifact song. And I don't know, the museum song, I think it's actually called, rather blandly, from Barnum.
Okay.
But it is. I enjoy the song because I always enjoy verbal dexterity, and I'm a great disciple of Gilbert. But I don't think it's as clever as Gilbert. I don't think it's as clever as Sondheim. Don't you give me that face. Gilbert's clever.
I think there are flaws in. I think it just comes down to the scansion of some of the lyrics. Just they don't sit quite as well as they could, and perhaps are just too purpley. And there are just maybe one or two words that, or even just syllables that are just out of place and don't really have the refinement
It's not crisp.
of Gilbert. No, it's not crisp.
Yeah.
No.
And therefore, yes, I like it as a song, but I would. It is not the best of form, shall we say? You know, it's not best in class. I don't think. The problem is we've been quite damning about Barnum, and I rather enjoyed it overall. That is the thing, you know. I think you're right. At one level, you have to enjoy it at the visceral level or the spectacle level. You know, lie back and let it amaze you.
Yeah.
And not exactly turn the brain off, but turn it onto simmer.
I think so. Yes. I can't say any more than I think that's a viable thing for a show to do, especially if it's promised you that, or not promised you, but it's not denying you of something it said it would do. Although that would be a very interesting kind of a musical, in some sense.
What if it told you I'm not going to do this?
Or if it told you I'm going to do this and then didn't do it.
Oh yeah. Well, that would be a humbug.
Yeah, that would be.
Possibly in the real sense of a humbug, actually, by failing to deliver.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there are a number of shows that if you do it well, then I don't see a problem with it. There are two that come to mind.
Yes,
One
go on.
is 42nd Street.
Which is coming to London again, isn't it?
It has, yeah. I think I prefer the film to the musical, but that's only because the film is brilliant.
Yeah. That's a very good reason to like the film.
Exactly. But it doesn't promise to be anything more than a very simple story about a group of dancers and putting on a show. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And the other one I really
So
liked.
descriptively, you're on the money, not just in it.
Yeah, exactly. The other one is a musical that was on Broadway a few years ago called It Should Have Been You, which
It's a marriage.
a marriage musical.
Yes. Oh, did you see it on Broadway?
I did see it on Broadway.
Oh, I saw it in Edinburgh last year.
Oh, amazing! I didn't know it had even come this side of the the river.
Quite a big river, isn't it? Yes, absolutely. It should have been you. It's the the wedding farce musical without.
Yeah, but it's you can see it as something which it isn't, which is it's not intellectually stimulating. It's not got music or songs that are challenging in any way. It's not trying to make really any point, or you can look at it for what it is, which is this kind of sitcom
Comedy romp.
Yeah, and it's really good at doing that. And if I were given the challenge to do that, I think I'd be really bad at it. And I think here are people who are good at doing that, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
You're right. There is nothing at all wrong with meeting your ambition for a show if your ambition is to entertain. Yeah, we wouldn't want all shows to be like Sondheim, and we wouldn't want all shows to be like Barnum.
No.
I think that's absolutely fair. By the way, I will just say that I really liked It Should Have Been You, but it's structurally insane.
Oh yeah,
it's
it's silly.
Yeah, but also, the central, or the person we're led to believe is the central character, more or less disappears for the second act.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's very odd, but a discussion for another day. So just finishing then on Barnum, well, let me ask you the binary question: what's the best and what's the worst thing about that production? What did you take away and thought, actually, that was great? And what did you think? Where did you roll your eyes and go? Hopefully not in the audience.
I think the best thing is the ensemble. I think they are terrific, and I went into it thinking. I mean, I've listened to the cast recording that I have a few times, but I did go into it thinking that I would be drawn to, even though I'd heard about Marcus's lovely notices, that I would be watching a show that was about Barnum and to some extent his wife. And really what I got out of it was a show that is a celebration of what Barnum created, which were these great acts and performances. So with that, numbers like Come Follow the Band were great. Worst bit about the show, I think it has to be the song "Colours of My Life."
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I thought you were going to go for the tightrope.
Oh no.
Yeah, because you're right. That song, unfortunately, it touches all the parts of my personality which I make my hackles rise. I cannot abide sentimentality, and it is that in spades. It's a song that's dollop full. I keep using this phrase, dollop full, because there's no measure to it of saccharine and goodness.
Yeah, just schmaltz.
Yeah, I'm afraid you entirely identify my weakest moment. I'm going to cheat and have two best moments. I thought, once again, the actress playing Barnum's wife, Charity, was stupendous, and that's a performance I will remember and carry with me for a very long time, which is odd because it's always been underwritten. It's always been identified as not being. If Glenn Close couldn't make it work, I think it's absolutely superbly impressive that I actually have come to the view that, although it isn't written that way, it is the story of Mr. and Mrs. Barnum. And secondly, my other best, two superlatives. It's impossible, isn't it? I suppose they're comparatives, really. Then would be. I suddenly fell in love with Come Follow the Band again, which I hadn't thought of for 15 years. And I thought, this is an amazing song, it really is.
Yeah,
and actually, isn't that great in a musical? You come out with a song, you think, this is a really superb song. Well, it doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't.
Well, Colm, thank you very much indeed. It's always interesting to talk about as shows which are slightly off our beaten track. And it's interesting to me where we've got so much overlap. But I'm also always interested to hear what other people have got to say. So thank you for opening my eyes to the fact which I think I was missing, which is really that actually you should just lie back, think of England and enjoy it for what it is, which is as a spectacle.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for having me.
Well, there we are, Colm Molloy. And he was talking to me about the recent London production of Barnum, which for my money was slightly less than the sum of its parts. But that's not to say it wasn't hugely enjoyable. I just don't think it needs that tightrope. It's a complete MacGuffin. But you, of course, may disagree. And I hope you'll be hearing more from Colm in the future, both here on Musical Talk and in the world of theatre. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Musical Talk. It must be very nearly time for me to say goodbye. Oh look, and there's the alarm telling me it's time to go. Well, who can argue with that? Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited by Thos and presented by Thos and Colm Molloy. Copyright Musical Talk 2019. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. Here we are again. Hopefully we won't have thousands of children screaming. I thought by sitting here we'd avoided that, but no, they were parked under there with their megaphones, apparently. Do you want to give me another level, just briefly?
Hello there. Hi, hello. Hi.
Thank you. That is a greeting and a half. Colm.
Hello.
I will speak over you. I'll do that one again if I'll let you give you time to say hello. Sorry. Hello, Colm.
Hello.